Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I want to talk about something very, very different, something you don't think about very often, and that is our calendar. Why is our calendar like our calendar is? Because our calendar has changed. In fact, in not that long, if you go back in American history, when we were a colony under the British Empire, our calendar changed. Now, throughout the world, we had something called the Julian calendar that had been introduced by Julius Caesar, and we followed it. But there were problems with it, especially when it came to holy days. And the way that calendar worked, Easter kept moving away from where it was supposed to be. And so Pope Gregory introduced his calendar, which was very different. And of course, well, it was basically put into effect immediately in areas that leaned very strongly to the Catholic Church, such as France, Italy, Poland, Portugal, and Spain. Countries that were more Protestant stayed with the Julian calendar. So now think about this. Here we are in Europe using two different calendar systems. And so it was different days in different parts of Europe. You want to talk about confusing? Well, it gets worse. Eventually Germany takes on the Gregorian calendar and several other countries. But the British Empire held back. And it wasn't until September 2nd, 1752, that the British Empire decided to adopt the Gregorian calendar. Now, this caused a lot of problems because, first off, they decided it was going to be that date. But this was all figured out in 1750, going into 1751. Because 1751 was an amazingly short year. It was just 282 days. Because they were rectifying the whole system. Now, by doing this, when we finally got to that date, September 2nd, 1752, the British Empire, all over, went to bed on the night of September 2nd, 1752, and they woke up on September the 14th, 1752. They had to correct the calendar to fit the Gregorian calendar, and the rectification took 11 days and so many hours. Therefore, everything changed. And this has nothing to do with any kind of narcolepsy or anything else. It was just basically administrative changing. And there's some very interesting points about this. When the Gregorian calendar came in, and as I mentioned, let's just say for the European areas of the British Empire, the colonies all over, all of a sudden, everything had changed, and everything was set, and Easter would stay pretty close to where it was. The only problem was they had one day that they were short, about every 4 years. So they solved it. In February, we have leap year, and that makes the calendar work at about 365 days, and then a little extra. So this is a very interesting point when it comes to history. I always get a kick out of this when I talk to people, and they tell me, on this date, in 1264, this happened. I said, old calendar or new? And they kind of look at you like, what? But the interesting thing is there's a lot of mistakes made in our history when we look at something in the Julian calendar rather than how it's been translated into the Gregorian calendar. Case in point, If you go to the graves in the United States of George Washington or John Adams or many other people of that time, and if they give an exact date, there will be two: old style and new style. So it's a very interesting thing that you might want to do some research on, especially kids. If you're doing a paper, think about the calendar and how it changed and how we lost 11 days and how 1751 only lasted 282 days rather than 365. It was a very, very interesting thing. And I don't think it's really talked about that much, and I would be not surprised at all that a vast majority of people are completely and totally unaware of it. So when someone talks to you about a certain date in history, ask them, new or old calendar? Or have you taken into account the change? I've often thought about this with a lot of these doomsday people I see on YouTube saying, on this date. And my question is, you've done all your figuring going back to biblical times. Have you factored in the change in the calendar? Because if you have not, it's quite a bit off. It's amazingly off. In fact, look at it this way. I mean, September 2nd turned into September 14th. All those days were lost. They didn't exist. There were actually riots over this in parts of the UK pertaining to changes, and people were upset about it. But there was a whole bevy of things going on. And it was kind of a fascinating thing. But Pope Gregory came up with it. It was instituted in part of Europe, eventually instituted in the United Kingdom, and now the United States, since 1752, has run on the Gregorian calendar. But when George Washington was born, when Benjamin Franklin was born, when John Adams was born, when James Madison was born, when Alexander Hamilton, well, he was past that, sorry. But the thing is, when all of those individuals were born, we were running under a different calendar, a totally different sense of time. Kind of an interesting thing we never ever think about. So I thought I'd share it with you here. Thanks.